it in the fall, so that's even better.
Oh yeah, I'll be in Greece. Yeah, I'll sit outside drinking my little tipper, and we'll do it. That's perfect.
That's even better. There you go. Wait, all right, go ahead, brother. English Catholic.
Hello, everyone. I guess I was just kind of invited here to discuss the papacy. So, Elijah, I wanted to ask you, are you particularly well read on the Council of Constance?
Council of Constance, I would say no. Is that in the I believe in the second millennium, right?
Yes, 1414 to 1418. Yes.
No, is that the three popes controversy?
That is the three popes controversy. Yep.
That's not something I'm well read on. But go ahead, brother, if you have a question.
Well, yeah, so I was looking at some stuff. There's a particular bull, or not bull, decree, frequens, that decrees that, and it's received by the newly christened Pope Martin V in the 41st session, which stipulates that an ecumenical council or a general council of the bishops is to be called frequently to prevent any further schisms from occurring.
Yeah.
And one of the councils, with the second council from Frequens after Siena, is the Council of Basile, which moves on to become the Council of Florence. I was curious for your take. Can a pope, in this case Eugene the Fourth, issue a bull that's non-coerced, um, and one that is received in full by a council that has full apostolic authority, and then later retract the bull?
Well, I guess it depends on what it is.
Yeah, so this is a bull that, are you familiar with the decree, the session 5 of Constance Hac Sancta?
I think I know what you're talking about, but go ahead. You talking about where they decreed about the
Conciliarism.
consumerism,
Hmm.
basically. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. Go ahead. What's your question?
So there's a there's a couple of ways I want to argue that Hac Sancta is a decree of an ecumenical council. So it's my contention that all 45 sessions of the Council of Constance are, under Rome's theory of ecumenical councils, infallible. Of course, your theologians like John of Torquemada are not going to grant that a council is above a pope, right? Because that's decreed in the fifth session. Would you like me to read that, or just what in particular I'm referencing?
No. I think you can just go on. You don't have to read it. If you want to read it, go ahead, but you don't have to read it.
That's okay. So, are you willing to accept just the idea that Session 5, the Hague Sancta Decree, is contrary uh, to the document Poster Aeternus from Vatican I?
So here's the thing. Here's how I look at this situation, I would say that Hague Santa is one of the more difficult things for a Catholic, right? Because it's an ecumenical council, like you're saying.
Hmm.
Here's what I would say for Hague Santa. In order for a council to be ecumenical, so when people say things like, "Can a council um, decree against the Pope?"
Hmm.
Can we have an ecumenical council without the Pope? Right. That's the general question. The answer is you can't, because in the Catholic world, you can't have an ecumenical council without a Pope.
Hmm.
Right? So the Pope has to consent to the council for it to be ecumenical. So no, you can't have an ecumenical council decree in opposition to a Pope. You can't. So a Pope has to approve it either during or after, or even have a decree before, like the Tome of Leo, right? Where they
Hmm.
approve the tome. So that's what I would say to that. Number one. Number two, in a situation where the church has its back against the wall, like in the three popes controversy, um, it's not a normative situation, right? So we're not taking a normative situation and dogmatizing the situation, saying this is how things are going to work, normatively speaking. This is like this is like practical things where the church's back is against the wall, and they have to decide on a matter without having a pope, right? Because there's three popes. Who was the real pope? There wasn't really three popes. There's one pope, but three of them were claiming to be the pope, right? But only one of them was, and so that's the controversy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in a situation like this is like emergency, like kind of this is what we have to deal with. This is what we have to work with. This is what's in our hands. That's all we could do right now. We don't know which one of these three are the popes. Which one is the pope? And so it's not a normative situation whereas Pastor Eternus is dogmatizing a normative situation in the church, where this is how the church operates, normatively speaking. If that makes sense. So that's my response to Hey Santa. It's probably not a satisfying one, but I don't know if uh, how much you know about the situation. But if you have any questions or any
Yeah,
comments.
I'm pretty familiar with the issues concerning the Council of Constance. Are you aware of the man who is elevated to the pontificate in the 41st session?
No, who's the man?
It's Cardinal Odone Colonna, who is the cardinal consort to whom he believes is the true pope, who is now known as anti-pope John the 23rd. It is John the 23rd who convokes the council in 1414. Now, if the cardinal consort of the man who convoked the council um, is the man who is later elevated to the pontificate, don't you think it would stand to reason that he believed the council to be convoked in the first session, thus meaning that it was a true council in his mind from session 1 through 45?
Sure.
Okay, so if Martin V, that's the name he takes for himself, believes that the Council of Constance is ecumenical from session 1, then it would follow that in his mind, when he formally ratifies the council, that session 5 is also ecumenical. And session 5 specifically decrees that anyone or of whatever state or dignity, even papal, that refuses to obey past and future mandates of a council is to be subjected to well-deserved penance, and if he does not consent, will be duly punished by the law. So it thinks a council can bind a pope to particular theological prerogatives, and if he doesn't submit to the council, which it claims a pope does not have immediate authority from Christ, but a council does, then the pope can be essentially excommunicated by the universal council and subjected to the authorities, the secular authorities, for punishment. So Haec Sancta thinks it's acting normatively, that um, that the position of the Catholic Church in the 15th century is that a general council can bind a pope's conscience. That's not Pastor
Well, again,
Eternus.
what do you mean by a general council? Like the council
Uh,
without a.
Sorry, a it's called general, but either ecumenical or general will be used interchangeably.
I know what you're saying by general. You mean ecumenical, but what I'm saying is, when you say ecumenical or general, are you saying a council that does not have the consent of the Pope behind it?
Yes. The position of Constance is that even if the Pope doesn't consent to a particular theological proposition, the Universal Council can bind his conscience to it, and if he does not assent to it, can excommunicate the Pope, even if the Pope does not agree to the claims of the bishops being made.
So this is very similar to an example that the article, it's called General Councils by Catholic Encyclopedia. It actually gives a situation where if you have a pope who is holding an opinion by himself in a council, right? And then all the bishops unanimously, all of them, every single one of them, hold the opposite opinion. He is bound to go with their opinion consciously. Like it's not like a juridical rule where you have to go with it, but it's like the way it words it. I'd have to pull it up and see. But that's just practicality, right? This is not a matter of judicial, it's not like juridical, right? This is practicality. For all the bishops at the council and all the bishops in the world are in a council, and they agree on one thing, and the Pope is by himself, going the opposite direction. His conscience is bind to go with the bishops. That's how it puts it, and that's a Catholic Encyclopedia article called General Council, and that's on my blog. I quote that section. That's not conciliarism. That's just common sense. That's just practicality.
The difference is that Hic Sancta seems to think that it's not just a matter of practicality, but a matter of faith.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, because here's the situation, and this is where what we were talking about earlier. I don't know if you were there. If the Pope holds an opinion by himself, if he's the only one who holds to an opinion, all the bishops disagree with him. Every bishop in the world, every bishop in the council disagrees with him. That opinion of the Pope is not going to be the right opinion, because it can't happen to where the Pope is the only bishop in the world that's Orthodox. That's impossible, because then you're saying that the whole episcopacy fell into heresy as a whole, and only one bishop upheld the church, and that's the Pope. That's the maximalist position, which we reject, because the episcopacy is divinely instituted. So if it's just one Pope, one bishop of Rome versus all the bishops, he's not going to win the day, because that is an absurdity. That's impossible. The Holy Spirit would never allow that to happen in our let's J. Dyer word paradigm.
I see.
So he
So,
would
so,
be.
so, so it's your position then that it's
Yeah,
a metaphysical impossibility for the pontiff to issue a decree that is
yeah,
contrary to the opinions of the bishops?
correct. Providentially speaking, it will never happen. It's impossible. That's the whole point of the minimalist position. It's that the Pope's decree will always have the bishops backing behind it, and vice versa. So the Pope, the headed members thing, the whole headed members, where the headed acts with the members, the body of bishops with the Pope, that goes back to the early church. That applies even in the Catholic Church. So the Pope the Pope is not the head in the sense of like a pyramid, right? He's the head of the college of bishops. So that means he's not apart from the college. He's not distinct from the college. He is in the college, right? So you think of it as the Pope who's the center of a circle. So he's right in the middle of it. He's not above it. He's not distinct from it. Those are his brother bishops, and that's who he goes to before he decrees. That's who they go to before they decree. They act together. So in a situation where the Pope is by himself, there's no way he's going to win that battle. Just providentially speaking, but not just providentially speaking, but just practically speaking. He's not going to be like, I'm going to be the only one who's right in the whole church. I mean, he would just falsify the whole church at that point, because the episcopacy would be falsified as a whole. They would all be in heresy.
Okay. Would you would you say then that it's an orthodox position to say that? Let me read it really quickly.
Sure. And by
Would
the
you?
way,
Mhm.
I'm not saying that Hague Santa is solved by what I'm saying. I think, again, to your point, I think Hague Santa is a difficult case for the Catholic position, but it's not an impossible case. But it is difficult. But go ahead, brother.
Okay. Would you see this as an orthodox position and can be reconciled with Pastor Eternus? First, it declares that legitimately assembled in the Holy Spirit, constituting a general council and representing the Catholic Church militant, it has power immediately from Christ, and that everyone of whatever state or dignity, even papal, is bound to obey it in those matters which pertain to the faith, the eradication of the said schism, and the general reform of the said Church of God in head and members. Would you see that Take Sancta claiming that only a general council has immediate power from Christ and not the Pope is an orthodox position?
Well, it said head and members. That's what I'm saying. How's that any different than what I just said?
I'm pointing out specifically that it's denying that the by implication that the pontiff is the one who has immediate jurisdiction from Christ. It is only the general council itself.
So
Would you consider that an
would I consider that what you cut out there?
Oh, sorry. I said, would you consider that an orthodox position?
So is your question that the council can decree in opposition to the Pope, even though the Pope doesn't consent?
Well, my question is that if do you think that the do you think that the immediate jurisdictional power belongs principally to a general council or to a pope?
Well, you can't separate those two things
Okay,
because
so
you can't have
is it
anyone
then
without the
mhm.
Pope.
Okay, so okay, so you can't have a general council without a pope, right?
Correct.
Okay. What if the pope then runs from the council? Is it still infallible? Or is it still general or ecumenical?
Not until a Pope, whether it's that one or the next one, ratifies it. It's not.
Yeah.
You have
Okay.
to have the head of the church, the Pope, consenting, and that goes back to the first millennium. The Bishop of Rome has to consent in order for you to have a universally binding council.
Right. So I just want
Okay.
to say something
So
real quick. Sorry to cut you off. So just quick, because I've been like I didn't want to cut into you guys' convo, but session 3 to session 5 is where that decree is made, the one you're talking about, English.
yeah, session 5.
So no, well, we would say it begins. The conversations begins at session 3. Now, you should know that that decree resolves a Western schism. So yes, there is something that occurs at an ecumenical council, but its decision is for the resolution of a Western schism. You understand? So your statement
Sure.
would reign true, and I'm going to yield. I'm going to mute up and let you guys continue. Your statement would reign true if the decree itself is meant to be enacted, uh, is meant to remedy something that is universally an issue, but it is actually meant to remedy an issue in the West. Now I'll mute and you guys can go ahead. And I'm actually going to walk away from my laptop for a moment. Go ahead.
Okay. You mind if I read the section that I was talking to you about on general councils? Maybe that'll help.
Sure. Go ahead.
So it is talking about ecumenical councils here. So that's the context. And it says, were the verdict unanimous, it would still be imperfect and fallible if it did not receive the papal approbation. The verdict of a majority, therefore, not endorsed by the Pope, has no binding force on either the dissentient members present or the absent members, nor is the Pope bound in any way to endorse it. So if it's majority, he's not bound to endorse it. It says its only value is that it justifies the Pope in case he approves it, to say that he confirms the decision of a council or gives his own decision with the consent of the council. This he could not say if he annulled the decision taken by a majority, including his legates, or if he gave a casting vote between two equal parties. Now, here's the key. It says a unanimous conciliary decision, as distinct from a simple majority decision, may, under certain circumstances, be in a way binding on the Pope and compel his approbation by the compelling power not of a superior authority, but of the Catholic truth shining forth in the witnessing of the whole Church. To exert such power, the Council's decision must be clearly and unmistakably the reflex of the faith of all the absent bishops and of the faithful. So I don't know if that made sense, but it's saying that if the bishops are unanimous, then it's like, hey, you have the full witness of all the bishops in the world. Exactly what I'm saying to you is that you can't have a situation to where the Pope is going to say no to that. He's bound because it's unanimous. He's bound by it because all the bishops in the world are witnessing to one truth. And if he says no and it goes the opposite direction, then the church has been falsified. Because he can't be the only Orthodox bishop in the church. That's impossible. That's providentially absurd.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
and let me just say this: this isn't what my focus is when I do the minimalist thing. Just to give you the context of where I'm coming from when I do the minimalist versus the maximalist, I'm dealing with the objections to the papacy, where we are asked as Catholics to show where this autocratic Lone Ranger, this dictator Pope existed in the early church in the first millennium, right? That's the question that we're asked as Catholics. And so my response to that is a misrepresentation of what Vatican I decreed. Vatican I did not decree a Lone Ranger, a dictator, a Pope that would go against the bishops. On the contrary, they decreed a Pope that is always, and they always saw him working with his brother bishops. And so any act that the Pope makes, whether it's in a council with the bishops or by himself, is not a act alone. It's an act with his brother bishops. So he will either poll them, if he's decreeing like the Immaculate Conception or Assumption of Mary, he'll either poll the bishops before he acts to make sure that what he is about to decree is the mind of the church, or he'll do it in a council together with them, where they're voting. And Vatican I calls the bishops judges in the council. They are judges. They are witnesses to the faith. It's not a small order. They're not just his like co-workers. They're not his employees. That's not how the church works. The bishops are not the Pope's employees. Their episcopacy is straight from God, divinely instituted. So they have a right from God to govern. They have a right to be confirmed by him. And his authority is not to take away their authority. It's to confirm their authority. That's what Vatican I even says. And I'm sure you've read that.
yeah.
You know. Well, go ahead, brother. I don't know if you have anything else to say about the Hoc Exante thing or anything else in general.
Typically, it's the position of most of your theologians that Haec Sancta contradicts papal infallibility. That's the position taken by Torquemada. It's the position taken by Gill, Sullivan. I've never actually encountered anyone who's argued this way, so this is interesting for me.
Well, I mean, watch. You said you haven't watched my stuff, so watch my video because I'm going into the Council Fathers of Vatican I, and I'm going into the bishops right after the Vatican I, how they interpreted Vatican I, and we have two letters, one from the Swiss bishops, and in 1871 that wrote to the Pope Pius IX, who, as you know, was at the council. We're not really at the council, but you know what I mean. He was, behind the
Yeah.
And then 1874, the German bishops also wrote to the Pope, and they are telling him this is how we're interpreting Vatican I, both of them, Swiss bishops and German bishops. And in both instances, the Pope approves their interpretation in the Swiss bishop and the German bishop. So if you go back and read those letters, so the German bishops, if you have Denzinger, it's in Denzinger 3112, 3116, and then his response is in
really quickly. Is this old Denzinger or new Denzinger, or will either or work?
I have. It's called. So I have the one. It's edited by Peter. 43rd edition is the one I have, and that's where I found. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because is this the free one online? Because there's a free Denzinger online that I typically use, but that's the old version because I don't want to buy the new one.
So I think if you go to the section where it's the First Vatican Council, and go a little bit after that, you should be able to find the German bishop's letter. And if not, just contact me and I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, I have it. And if you watch my video, it's right on my video. So I actually read the whole letter, and I
Okay.
read the comments back from the Pope. And so when you contextualize Vatican I, and you have a proper understanding of Vatican I. Again, this is not from Elijah Yassi's opinion. Like, I'm going into these bishops,
Sure. Mhm.
including a bishop named Monsignor Fessler, who was, very high up at the council, who's posing the minimalist position against the maximalist in his time. Cardinal Newman is doing the same thing, the minimalist position against the maximalists in his time. And the maximalists in his time were Anglicans. So I think you're an Anglican too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So, the Anglicans at the time, they're like, oh, Vatican I dogmatized this like dictator. Like, how could you do that? There's no such thing as a dictator in the early church. It never worked that way. And these bishops are responding to those maximalists. They're not maximalists in the Catholic Church, but they're non-Catholics, and they're responding back, like Bismarck, Dr. Schultz, Norfolk, and all these folks that they're responding to. And contextualizing the council. I think you might have a different perspective once you watch the video, as I think most people have, because a lot of people, like, I was the same thing. I thought the Pope was this like dictator and blah blah blah, until I actually looked into it, and I'm like, that's not how things work, because that's not what Vatican I dogmatized, and it's very clear what they dogmatized, and it's not the normal misrepresentations that I've heard from Catholics and non-Catholics.
Okay. A couple more questions. All right. What would you say conciliarism is then? Because this sounds because correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that you're saying that the pontiff is simply dogmatizing, if you will, the already universal positions of the Catholic Church. So to use, are you familiar with not Kano? It's are you familiar with Father Berthier?
I'm not.
Okay, he's a very influential French Roman Catholic canonist. He has this distinction between De Fide Divina and De Fide Catholica, right? And the distinction between Divina and Catholica is one is formally pronounced by either the scriptures or the church to be
Yeah.
believed by all. And then the other is universally believed by the entire universal, or believed by the entire universal church, right?
Mhm.
So, firstly, is it your position that the function of the pontiff is to simply make formal what is already being materially believed by the universal church?
So generally, yes, but not always. So let me touch on that question, because that's a very, very good question. And I don't want to be misunderstood here, because I'm not a conciliarist. Obviously, conciliarism is a heresy in the Catholic Church,
Mhm.
and it went against what Vatican I taught.
Right.
So
Mhm.
let me just give you an example. And are you familiar with the Relatio of Bishop Gasser at Vatican?
I've read Gasser.
Okay, good. So this is coming from Gatzer, right? So it's not just simply the Pope making known the mind of the church. That's normatively how things work. That's just the perfect way of how things work. And a lot of times that's how things have worked. Like in the Immaculate Conception Decree, Assumption Decree, everybody agreed on that besides like a few bishops here and there. But universally, all the bishops said yes to it before the Pope decreed it, right? They said, yes, we do believe it. So in that sense, yes. So the Pope is making known the mind of the church. Now, Gasser says, what happens if you have a situation to where the bishops disagree with each other? Let's say like a split 50-50, right?
Mhm.
Conciliars would be like, well, we're stuck now. Either everybody agrees or we have no decree, right? You can't have 50% saying something and 50% saying another thing. But in the
In the
Catholic,
in the case
go
of
ahead.
like apostolic et curiae, right?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but in the Catholic sense, um, this is where the Pope steps in. Now there's option one, 50%, option B, the other 50%. Right? I'm just making an example just to simplify it.
Sure.
He has these two options to look into and say which one is the right one, right? And he decrees with that option, and it's up to the other 50% to say, well, since the Pope is in agreement with those bishops, then we're bound to that, and we're gonna either enter into that agreement with them, or we can just kind of like go our own way, kind of like the Oriental Orthodox did in the Chalcedonian controversy, or the what's called the Assyrian Church in the Ephesus
Mhm.
controversy, right? So they have these options whether they can join that decree or they can leave it. But we believe that the Pope can settle a matter when the church is split. He doesn't need, if the church is split and he can't get an agreement with all the bishops, obviously he's going to try. That's the first thing he wants to do, is he wants everyone to agree, right? But he doesn't want everyone to agree on heresy, right? So everybody has to agree on what the truth is. But if let's say he tried all he can and they're just not playing nice with each other, those two sides, at the end of the day, he has a decision to make. And we believe that when the Pope makes that decision, whatever decision he decides, whether it's option A or option B, he can't make up option C where he's the only one, because that would falsify the church. He'd be the only bishop. He's working either with option 1 or option 2 or option A or option B. And so when he decrees with that option, that's the infallible decree as far as what we believe. And that's what Vatican I dogmatized, essentially, is that whichever side the Pope picks, that's where the infallibility is. But again, he's not picking a side where he's the only one there, because then he'd be the only witness, and he can't be the only witness to the truth. That's impossible. There has to be, a pretty good chunk of bishops with him. You can't just be like with him and 3 other bishops, right? And we don't make up numbers and dogmatize, say it has to be like 30% or 40%, right? We just kind of leave that to the Holy Spirit. That's providentially speaking, the headed members are always going to be there together for the most part, on a normative sense. But on a situation like this, where it's not normative, something's got to give. The Pope has to step in and say, hey, this side is right, this side is wrong.
I see. So, like, to give an example, then, say there's, 1/3 of the bishops at a council, and they take position A, and there's 66% of bishops at a council, and they take position B, and the pontiff is siding with position A, and he decrees position A. That would
Yeah,
bind all bishops taking position B, right?
absolutely. Yes, that's correct. But
And you
that,
would
that, that
and yeah, and you would distinguish this from conciliarism, which would require 51% of the bishops at a council to agree on something, right?
well, I think conciliarism would require a lot more than 51%. I don't think it's voting on, let's see who has the most votes. I think conciliarists would say it has to be a heavy majority, almost like all the bishops agreeing on something. That's conciliarism, and that's false in the Catholic Church.
Right,
And that's
right.
very different than saying all the bishops agree on one thing and the Pope doesn't. That's not conciliarism. That's just like what I read to you earlier. That's just practical. Like, of course, you can't have one bishop holding one opinion in opposition to all the bishops. That's impossible. So he would be bound to agree with them, because, and if you watch my video, you'll see why I'd say that is because the Pope, and hear me out here, because this is a misconception, and I think you may know this already, but the Pope doesn't have all the answers. He's not an oracle. So he's not like, just because there's a question that arises in the church, it doesn't mean the Pope is energized with
Oh,
the answer, but
certainly
right.
he's not inspired, he's just protected by a charism. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and that's why. So, but yeah, go ahead, brother.
Okay. That basically, I was going to ask you next, what do you think conciliarism is? Because what what would it take for a
Mhm.
document to say to go against Pastor Eternus? What
Well,
would
if you
that?
have, yeah, I mean, it would be like, um, you know, bishops, let's say, like basically what I just read to you, like if it's a majority of bishops, they can't win out. They can't win the day, because just because they're a majority doesn't mean that they can go against the Pope. So in a conciliar world, the Pope is okay. I guess he's important and he's first, cool, but it's just an honorary thing, right? Maybe he's the first one to place his vote. or something along those lines, right? But he can't bind like a majority of bishops to something. You can't disagree with the majority of bishops on something. Now, let me just clarify something. When there's an ecumenical council held, obviously, I don't know what your belief is on this, but as Catholics, we believe that the Holy Spirit is behind the council, right? He's
Oh,
assisting the
yeah.
council, right?
Classical Protestants believe in believe in infallible councils. It's just the question is, how do you know when something's infallible?
Sure.
But
For
sure.
the argument, yeah. So we don't think that there's going to be a council where you're going to have 33% of bishops siding with the Pope and then they went out. Again, that's another absurdity. That's never happened before. Every council that the Catholic Church has always had the majority of bishops with the Pope, not the minority with the Pope. Because we like I said, in the council, and just think about this, and I always bring it back to this example. When Arianism was running rampant, you probably see about 55 to 60% of bishops around the world were Arians, right? So the majority were Arians, right?
Yeah.
And the minority, let's say 40, 45%, 40%, somewhere around there, are Orthodox. I know it's nuanced, there's the semi-Arians, blah, 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 but let's leave that to the side.
Sure.
So, but what happened was when the council was held in Nicaea, you had like two dissenting bishops. I think it was two, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was like a very, 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 very small minority.
It's overwhelming.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. So in an ecumenical council where the bishops are meeting and the Holy Spirit is behind it, the Holy Spirit is going to ensure that the truth wins out at the council. So it's when it's a solemn definition, when it's a solemn vote, when all the bishops are in one room, where two or three are gathered under my name, then it's a different story than when they're scattered around the world, right? And each one has their own opinion, kind of thing. If that makes sense.
Sure. Interesting. Okay. Just a couple more questions.
Shall we give way to somebody else?
Sure, you're the host. Go ahead.
Yeah.
In fairness, so
Yeah.
that we're not.
Yeah. If you don't mind, just one more question. I want to see.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay. So you're familiar with Pope Agatho's letter to Constantinople III, right?
Yes.
Okay. And how in that particular letter he claims that the Roman See has never erred, and I believe he says will never err, right?
Correct.
Yeah. I was going through various responses to that because, of course, that's everyone has their tough parts for their ecclesiology, and that's the tougher one for the scripturalists and conciliarists. But Pope St. Agatho's letter is tough.
Yeah.
And the standard Anglican and Eastern Orthodox response is that they're granting honorifics, they're allowed when they accept the letter, but that the historical reality of the position that Pope Agatho is taking, that the Roman See has never erred, is actually an erroneous position. And so I finished Craig Trugley's book a couple weeks ago now, and he doesn't make this argument in full, but he alludes to it, and he says that Pope St. Stephen I is corrected on his baptismal theology. If you remember, Pope St. Stephen, as long as all present matter, form, and intent exists, the baptism is valid. And Bruglia seems to suggest that it's not that he's corrected, and I was doing some research on where exactly, and it would seem that the fifth canon of the First Council of Constantinople seems contrary to the baptismal theology of Pope St. Stephen. Specifically, in the case of the Montanists, they're noted by major Roman Catholic scholars like Yaroslav Pelikan as being major contributors to the to the doctrine of the Trinity. Pelicans argues this pretty extensively in a 1957 paper. I can send it to you later if you'd like. Um, and so I was curious because the baptismal theology of Constantinople I is they tolerate the baptism of Arians and they say that they receive them as heretics, meaning they're simply signed to confess their sins before a priest and to sign a confession of orthodoxy. But in the case of the Eunomians, who were just more extreme Arians, the only difference was they did not accept the baptism of the Orthodox Christians. They required the Eunomians to be rebaptized, right?
Yep.
And they distinguish Arian from Eunomian, Arian likely meaning either semi-Arian or an Arian who accepted the baptisms of the Orthodox. And so my question to you is, do you see Canon 5 of Constan 1 as holding a different baptismal theology than Pope St. Stephen?
I don't know, honestly. I'll be honest with you. It's not something I've looked into. I know I've heard the question before. Excuse me.
Okay.
But I really am not going to do it this any justice by answering that question. But to say this real quick, I know Constantinople I initially was a local council in the East, right?
Right.
So
Ludwig Ott calls it a plenary council only. Yeah.
yeah, so I don't think they were sitting there intending on binding something on the Church Universal. And I don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if there ever was a formal approval by any pope for that council. It kind of just became ecumenical, and then eventually the popes started including it. But there was never like a formal approval, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't know exactly what kind of approval the popes gave to that council, whether it was all the decrees, including the one you're talking about, or it was, the
Or if it's just the image of the council.
correct. Yeah. So that's what I would say to that. But I'm not your guy for this question because that's not. It's been a while since I've looked into this. It's been like probably over a decade. I'd have to brush up on that to read up on that again. But yeah, no, that's a good question. But that's not. And I don't see really an issue with this, to be honest with you, even on the Catholic.
Pertaining to Agatha's letter. Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you say then Agatha could be mistaken on history that the Roman Church has never aired?
Well, are you saying that Pope Saint Stephen erred on his stance?
Oh, I personally don't think he did. I think he's well. Actually, that's a tough question. Frankly, I'm I'm torn.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting to me.
Yeah, I would say he didn't err, so I don't know how that would be relevant to what Agatha thing. But the other thing is brother, is Agatha was saying that, like he's saying something like that, and that needs to be dealt with. Whether he's wrong is not relevant to me, at least to me as a Catholic, because the council
Sure.
accepts it, right? So if he's
Well,
wrong, they would.
that's the thing is it accepts Agatha's letter after George of Constantinople, the patriarch, scrutinizes the letter for orthodoxy and compares it against the fathers. In other instances where the Pope issues like a papal bull, say the condemnation of the propositions of Michael Baius, the predecessor to Cornelius Jansen, ex omnibus, or the condemnations of Jansen in Comunicazione,
Mhm.
like he's not consulting anybody. He's just outright declaring that Jansen or Baius's interpretation of Trent is not orthodox.
Well, was there any disagreement by the bishops saying, "Hey, what do you mean they're not Orthodox?" I think the bishops agreed with him on that.
Some did. Some did. The Gallicans were pretty split on this. The Spanish were pretty strongly against a lot of the Gallicans. I want to say Bossuet and Natalis helped defend the Jansenists. Tornelli doesn't. He goes pretty strongly against them. So the Gallicans are kind of split on this.
And that's
And the
fine. I mean, as you
yeah,
know, Vatican I decreed against Gallicanism, so that's a
right.
heresy, right? So that's like saying the Arians agreed. So that sucks. that the Arians disagree. Like, oh, tough luck. The Arians disagreed. Who cares, right? But yeah, I mean, Pope Agatho's letter. It's not just his letter. This is not the first time where a Roman Pope is claiming this infallibility that's perpetual, right? I believe the Formula Mistus makes the same claims on them.
Yeah, the Formula Hermes is a fun one too.
But what I'm saying is, like, this is not like a shocking thing for the East to hear, because the popes have been, and even who was it, Pope Boniface, who makes similar claims. He doesn't say, well, you know, he doesn't say future tense, but he says has never erred,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, of course, the standard response would be the Roman See's got a pretty good, at this point, a pretty good track record on defeating heresy.
Sure, but that's begging the question. I mean, why does it have one, right? And the Catholic would say that because of Matthew 15 and Luke 22, I believe, and John 20.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the Catholic answer, right? So we're begging the question and saying, oh, they have a perfect track record. Well, there's a reason why they have a perfect track record, because it's an office that's divinely instituted by Christ, as the popes would say. So yeah, I think that Pope Agatho's letter is a big problem for Eastern Orthodox, not Oriental Orthodox, but Anglicans. They have to deal with what was actually said in the letter. Whether they think he's right or wrong is irrelevant, because the Council Fathers accepted the letter and they saw nothing wrong with it, right?
Would you?
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah. Sorry.
When you brought up the notion of rebaptism, did you make the distinction between the Donatists and the Arians, or the Donatists and the Neo-Arians? Do you know this?
I don't think I brought up the Donatists. I just brought up the Eunomians and the Arians.
Okay, because
I brought up the Montanists.
oh, I see. Okay,
Yeah, I brought up the Montanists because I was cited Pelican. Yeah.
I just want to, like, if you're talking about the Arians, I know we have the canons of the Council of Arles, right?
Yeah.
Which kind of echoes Saint Stephen's statement, right? So
Right, they do.
their question on the creed, and if the creed is orthodox, then their baptism is examined and potentially accepted, right? I think this is Canon 8 of Arles.
Yeah,
Canon
but
8,
of course,
my memory serves me correct.
I'm willing to accept that.
So I don't think Agatho's statement is
Mhm.
going to produce like a contradiction because history contradicts. Because I don't know if I would even grant that in your stance, even though I know Yaroslav Pelikan probably said that, right? But I just want to put that up there. Go ahead, fellas. Because I was thinking about it, I'm like, but that's not how I remember it. But perhaps you have information I haven't looked at yet. So
Yeah. Geez, I would like to continue this conversation for a while, but I'll stay as long as you guys permit me to keep discussing with you. But
let me ask you a question. I mean, are you going?
Mhm.
And to be honest with me, brother, you don't have to say yes to this. But are you going to watch the video that I have? I know it's a long video, but if you watch it on like 1.5x, we'll cut it.
if you if you DM it to me, I think I will.
Okay, so I'll message you right now. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, I'll definitely get that up. I've never actually seen anyone take this position before, or at least I'm very bad at interpreting you guys' documents.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Form, yeah, for
go ahead.
yeah. Mhm.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say when I was Roman Catholic, I took a bit more of an ultramontane stance. So
Well, I think that
that
this is ultramontane. So I'm not going against ultramontanism. This is ultramontanism. That's really ultimately what was
right.
dogmatized at Vatican I. I'm going against neo-ultramontanism. That's a difference between the minimalists and the maximalists. The maximalists were neo-ultramontanists, and there were maximalists at the Council of Vatican I, and they were a minority, but they wanted to dogmatize that basically the Pope is an oracle. That's what they wanted to dogmatize. They did not win out. And then you had the minority bishops on the other side that wanted to dogmatize that the Pope has to ask permission before he dogmatizes. They didn't win out either. What won out is the moderate stance, which was something more in the middle between those two. And that's ultramontanism. I'm not against ultramontanism. No, I'm against Gallicanism, conciliarism. Conciliarism and Gallicanism doesn't see a situation where the Pope has 50% on one side and 50% on the other side, and he can choose which one is the right side and be infallible. That's ultramontanism, right? That's not Gallicanism. That's not, that's not conciliarism.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Would you also be willing to send me the acts of Vatican I? Take a look at those.
So Acts of Vatican I, I don't have those, but I have. I mean, you've read Gasser, so that's really what I on that. I'm not familiar with the Acts of Vatican I.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just curious of seeing the debates before Vatican I's kind of ended abruptly.
You will see that's what Gasser does. So Gasser is dealing with, as you know, chapter 4 of Pastor Eternos. That's
Right.
there's different chapters. There's like universal jurisdiction being dogmatized. Gasser is specifically on papal infallibility. And if once he finishes his speech, then afterwards, then you can kind of like read the debates back and forth. He actually documents those. And then you have like the minority bishops that say, well, we want the Pope to ask for permission, or we want the Pope to make sure he seeks the consent, and blah blah blah. And Gasser is responding to them. Even in the actual speech, he's responding to them. But afterwards, where he says, anybody have any objections, or anybody want to ask any, raise anything, feel free to do so now. And you have a bunch of bishops that do, and he responds to them, right? So that's what I've read as far as acts go. I've never read, like, I'm not even familiar or aware that there are acts of Vatican I, and if there is, I mean, I'd love to get my hands on that.
Oh, I'm simply posing the question because I'm not sure either, and I was kind of hoping you were.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I mean, I know there's acts of Vatican II, but they're, I think, in Latin or Spanish, or both. But they're not made available in English as of right now.
That's fine. I'm decently good at Latin. I'm a Latin 3 student, so my Latin
Oh,
is good enough to where I can read it.
so if you Google acts of Vatican II, you'll find the free version. Like, there's a website that has all the acts, and they're all, I think, again, correct. You'll have to correct me once you open it up, but I think they're in Latin. If not, then it would be in Spanish.
Okay.
Yeah.
My Spanish is not very good.
Yeah. Same here.
Unfortunately.
All right, let's move on to somebody else, guys, because
That's good.
we're being.
Do you guys frequently? Are you guys
I think I'll do this
frequently?
here and there, bro. Maybe like once a week if Elijah's down.
Yeah. I mean, whatever, because I have a wife and 3 kids, so whatever
Yeah.
I'm able to. Right now it's 12:55 a.m. right now for me, so it
Yeah.
depends on.
He has a wife, 3 kids, and 2 persons. So it's
Well,
fine.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I would just like to continue further picking your brain on this. So whenever this is up again.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, let's ask. Does anyone want to say anything?
yeah, if nobody
If
else
not,
wants to say anything,
these
we can.
gentlemen can continue. And yeah,
Where did I put?
or maybe Blues wants to say something.
Go ahead, brother.
I'm looking to see if there's any Orthodox who want to step up. I think Glove, that guy, I think he's
Love?
Orthodox.